In this final video for D4, we're going to finish up page 5. And notice what's changed is in this one, instead of being given the equation, you're going to be given a graph, and you're going to write a sine function that matches it. So we're going to, for all of these, write a function that's of the form y equals a times the sine of bx. And remember that the a affects the amplitude, has something to do with the amplitude, and the b affects the period, affects the horizontal distance that it takes to go through one cycle. So what we're going to do first is state the amplitude and the period, and then we're going to write the equation that matches this. So for this particular function, the amplitude, if we take a look at the graph, remember that one of the ways to find amplitude is to look for the high value, the maximum function value, the minimum function value, and then take the average. And that will give us the principal axis. And then we can find the amplitude by measuring the distance from that principal axis up to the max or down to the min. So for this one, it looks like the maximum function value, if I go back here, is probably about 0.5. So we have a maximum function value of 0.5. And it looks like the minimum function value for this one, if I come down here and go back across, is going to be negative 0.5. And so the average of those, hopefully this is quick, is just going to be adding them up, dividing by 2, and we end up with 0 divided by 2, which is 0. So just like before, our principal axis is going to be the line y equals 0. And so the amplitude then will be the distance from that principal axis up to the maximum point, so that's 0.5, and then the distance from this principal axis down to the minimum point is also 0.5. So the amplitude will be 0.5 or 1/2. For the period, remember the period is the distance along the x-axis that it takes to go through one cycle. So if I just start here at this point, because I'm doing a sine graph, and the sine graph usually starts on the principal axis. So if I use that as my starting point, I go down, I go back up again, I come back down, and now at this point it starts to repeat. And so it's gone through one whole cycle in 4 pi units. So the period is 4 pi. Notice, by the way, that this also flips because a regular sine graph goes up and then back down again. So we maybe want to write a note to ourselves that this flips, which tells us that the value of a is going to be negative. So when we write the equation, we start out with y equals, and we just said that the value of a is not going to be just 1/2, but negative 1/2. So that ensures that the amplitude will still be 1/2, but the negative is what's going to flip it over the x-axis. Then we want the sine of bx. And a place where students commonly make a mistake is they want to just take the period, which is 4 pi, and put that in for b. But remember, b is not the period. It helps us find the period, but it's not the period. The formula for period, remember, is period equals 2 pi divided by the absolute value of b. And so if you think about multiplying both sides of this by absolute value of b, what we'll end up with is the absolute value of b times the period is equal to 2 pi. And then if I divide both sides by the period, I'll get that the absolute value of b is equal to 2 pi divided by the period. And so for this particular problem, I'm running out of space, I'm going to come over here, we can say that the absolute value of b, or in this case we'll just b because we're always going to have b be a positive number, b is going to be equal to 2 pi divided by the period, which is 4 pi. And so what will happen is these will divide out. Pi divided by pi is 1, so b will be 2/4 or 1/2. So be really careful about that. Remember, you don't just put this value in for b, you have to calculate what b will be. And then we'll finish this up, and this will be 1/2 times x. And so here's our final equation that we come up with. And I would encourage you to, just like before, put this into your graphing calculator and then put in your x min is 0, x max is 4 pi, y min is negative 0.5, y max is 0.5, and then you should see this one cycle on your graphing calculator, and that's a good way to check that. We're now finished with D4.